They watched from a distance as the birth unfolded, but no one, not even the researchers, were ready for the father's response. It was the dry season in the Samburu Reserve, and the earth cracked beneath every step. Dust rose like breath from the ground, and the watering holes shrank smaller with each sun. But amidst the heat and stillness, a miracle stirred. Her name was Amale, a 30-year-old matriarch, wise, quiet, respected. She had led her small herd through 3 consecutive dry years without losing a calf. She had seen fire, she had seen poachers, and now she was about to give birth again. The team from the Wildlife Behavior Institute had been following Amale's herd for over 6 months. They knew she was close. Her belly was enormous, her movements slower. But even they hadn't expected what came next. On a golden morning just after dawn, Amale left the herd, walked alone into the acacia grove east of the watering hole, a place the elephants rarely visited. They followed quietly, binoculars, long lenses, radios off. They saw her kneel, then lie down, then the first calf, small, still slick with life, wriggling and already searching for her legs. The team whispered excitedly into their recorders. Healthy, strong, standing quickly. Then came the second, and gasps followed. Twins, someone said. It's twins. But Amale did not stand. She groaned, struggled. Her body heaved again. And then, a third calf, a third life, blinking against the harsh sun. Triplets. The word passed between them like wind. Rare, impossible, fragile. But it had happened. And now, she was still, lying flat, breathing hard, her trunk twitching. The calves squeaked and stumbled over each other, nudging her sides, but Amale didn't move. The team held their breath. Then they saw him, emerging from the distant dust like a memory. Tao, the bull, the father. No one had seen Tao for weeks. Bull elephants often disappeared after mating season, wandering vast distances alone. They were seen as protectors once, now mostly as unpredictable, displaced kings without a throne. But there he was, massive, dust-covered, tusks chipped from old battles. His ears flicked slowly, his steps deliberate. He walked not to the researchers, not to the watering hole, but straight to Amale. She didn't lift her head, but her trunk reached for him. It trembled in the air until it found his leg, wrapped loosely, held. The calves stumbled around his feet, unsure. Their eyes wide, tiny trunks raised in confusion and fear. Tao did not ignore them. He knelt, yes, knelt, and let his great head drop low to theirs. One by one, he touched each of them gently with his trunk. The researchers, hidden behind brush and long-range lenses, were silent. No one took a photo. Not yet. Amale was breathing, but not well. The birth had drained her. 3 calves, in this heat, on this soil. She could no longer stand. Tao began pacing in wide circles around her. Not restless, strategic. Every few steps, he paused and lifted his trunk high into the air, sniffing, scanning. Sentries. He became a sentinel. When a hyena appeared at the tree line, drawn by the scent of blood, Tao turned toward it with thunder in his gait. He didn't charge. He didn't need to. The hyena vanished. One of the calves let out a squeaky, confused trumpet. Tao turned back to them, touched its side, stayed close. By sunset, Amale had still not risen. Her body was shaking. The researchers considered stepping in. Dehydration. She needs water. Intervention might be the only... No, doctor, Rena said quietly. She chose that spot, and he's here now. Indeed, Tao was now gently pushing Amale with his tusks. Not hard, not aggressive, just insistence, encouragement. But she was too weak. Then something none of them had ever recorded before happened. Tao walked to the shallow trench Amale had carved in the earth to lie down, and began to dig, with his trunk, with his tusks, slowly, methodically. Dust flew. The calves watched. The researchers froze. Tao dug until the hard red earth gave way to damp, dark clay. And then, a trickle. Water. Not much. But enough. He scooped it with his trunk, sprayed Amale's cracked skin. Her eyes fluttered. He sprayed her face, her mouth. She drank, Not from a pond, but from him. The researchers didn't speak. They couldn't. One reached for her radio. Another stopped her. "No," he whispered. "Let them be." Amali slept as the stars rose. Tao stood beside her. The calves huddled at her side. And for the first time in hours, there was no fear. Only the hush of night, and a father standing watch. But he did more than watch. By morning, the wind shifted. The heat had not yet returned, but flies had. Buzzing clouds of them hovered around the calves, crawling over Amali's side. She tried to bat them away with her trunk, but could barely lift it. Tao moved closer. He swept his massive ears, slow, deliberate, covering her eyes, her side, her mouth. He stood over her like a tree, his own body taking the brunt of the pests, shielding her from sun and sting alike. One of the calves tried to mimic him. It flapped its tiny ears, too short to reach anything, then squeaked in frustration. Tao turned and lowered his head to the calf's level. He did not scold. He showed. He raised one leg, then slowly brought it down beside the calf. A signal, a rhythm. The calf copied him, awkward, unbalanced, but learning. Dr. Rena whispered into her recorder, "He's teaching them. He's teaching them." By the second day, Amal stirred. Her trunk searched again, for Tao, for water, for reassurance. He was there, and with him, more of the herd. It started with a distant trumpet, then dust, then silhouettes, 2 matriarchs, an elder female, a young male from Amali's previous litter. They approached slowly, carefully. One matriarch paused beside Tao and pressed her forehead to his flank. No sound, no display. But the researchers understood. It was permission, recognition. The calves, though unsteady, had begun to mimic each other. They walked in staggered steps. One led, one followed, one wandered, then returned. Each time they fell, Tao was there. Sometimes he nudged them with his trunk. Sometimes he simply waited. But always he watched. Always he chose presence over panic. On the third night, Amali stood. It wasn't graceful. Her legs trembled, her breath wheezed. But she rose. Tao stepped back, giving her space. The calves rushed toward her. She greeted them with low, rolling rumbles, each one distinct, each one directed. They quieted, listened, then circled back to Tao, not for comfort, but for balance. At sunrise, the herd gathered around her. Amali led them to the western ridge, but Tao did not follow. He remained behind, standing at the edge of the grove, watching. It was the youngest calf who turned first. It walked back to him, pressed its small forehead to his leg, and stood there, still, quiet, as if to say, "I see you, I remember." Then it turned and followed its mother. Tao watched until they disappeared into dust. Then he walked toward the trench, touched the dark earth with his trunk, and slowly covered it. At that moment, the researchers hit the record button for the first time. But only a sentence was recorded, not an image. He never needed to be asked. He only needed to be trusted. That line, once whispered into a dusty field recorder, would become the title of a research paper, then a documentary, then a mural in a school for children who had lost their fathers. But long before those things, it lived only in the stillness, in the silence after Tao walked away. He didn't rejoin the herd that day. Instead, he wandered to the high rocks above the valley, where elephants rarely lingered. From there, he could see the entire plain, the watering hole, the path Amali and her calves had taken, the trench he had dug. He stood there for hours, not grazing, not resting, just standing, observing. The researchers debated whether to approach. Dr. Rena, always cautious, argued against it. "Intervention erases observation," she said, "and we're here to witness, not disrupt." Still, they couldn't look away. Tao's actions didn't fit neatly into any of their existing models. He wasn't simply protecting. He wasn't dominating. He wasn't behaving like a typical bull. He was choosing. Back in the capital, word of the triplet birth had reached park officials and international researchers. Rare, miraculous, needs monitoring. But the footage of Tao, that changed everything, because no one had ever captured what he did next. 2 days after Amale and the calves left, a lone hyena pack crept into the grove, likely drawn by the scent still lingering in the soil. Tao returned, not with fury, but with precision. He herded them away, not by force but through movement. He blocked their path, drove them into confusion, scattered them without a sound. Then in a motion caught by 3 separate lenses, he turned back and flattened the trench. Every trace of blood, birth, and scent was erased. It was an act of protection, but also erasure, as if saying, "This chapter is over. I have finished what I came to do." He disappeared the next morning, not into violence, not into chaos, but into the trees, and was not seen again for 3 years. But he was remembered by Amale, who returned to the grove each season, pausing beneath the same acacia, by the calves who now walked strong, sometimes circling each other the same way he had walked around them, by the researchers who used his story to teach new rangers that leadership wasn't always loud, and by a little girl in a nearby village who pointed to the mural painted on her school wall, depicting a massive bull elephant watching over 3 tiny calves beneath the stars. "That's the elephant who watched the babies," she said. "And that," she whispered, "is what real strength looks like." The teacher standing nearby had heard her, but instead of correcting her or explaining the mural in scientific terms, she simply nodded. "Exactly," she said, then turned to the class. "Today we draw what strength means to us." That afternoon, 15 children sketched versions of Tao, some under stars, some next to Amale, one with his trunk wrapped around a tiny calf like a blanket. Not a single drawing showed Tao roaring or charging. Every version of him was still, present, watching. Back at the reserve, a new team of researchers arrived the following season. Graduate students from 4 countries, eager, brilliant, heavily trained in behavioral metrics. They asked about the triplets, about Amale, about Tao. Dr. Rena led them to the field. "This is where it happened," she said, pointing to the grove. They began pulling out sensors, drones, infrared cameras. She waited, then said gently, "If you're only looking for numbers, you'll miss the story." They looked confused. Then she pulled out a weathered field journal, handwritten notes, no charts, just observations, feelings. She turned to a page. It read, Day 2. Tao shaded Amale with his body for 4 hours, moved only to drink and return. Calves followed his shape like a shadow. Wind still. Time didn't exist. One student read the line twice, then said quietly, "Did he know what he was doing?" Dr. Rena smiled. "Maybe the better question is, did we?" That year, Tao became part of the park's ranger training materials, not as a case study in alpha behavior, but as a module in presence, in non-interference, in relational intelligence. They called it the Sentinel model. Elsewhere, Tao's story found its way into unexpected places. A counselor used it in group therapy with foster teens. A young woman in Kenya painted a full mural of him across a clinic wall, trunk outstretched toward 3 blooming trees, one for each calf. A local poet wrote, "He did not rule, he did not roar, he stood," and that changed everything. And still, the grove remained, untouched. Visitors were allowed to view it, but only at a distance. No flash photography, no loud speaking, just reflection. Some said they could still feel him there, as if Tao's choice to stay, not to act out of power but out of care, had seeped into the roots of the land itself. A silence that held weight, a presence that did not fade. Because even when Tao himself was no longer visible, his choices continued to ripple. Through the herd, through the soil, through the people who had once thought elephants were only muscle and memory. Amale returned each year with her calves. They were taller now, stronger. One had a slight curve in its right tusk, a perfect mirror of Tao's. Another had developed the habit of circling before lying down. And the smallest one, still fond of nudging the others with its forehead, had taken to standing watch while the rest of the herd drank, like he had, as if something of him had lived on, not by blood, but by behavior, not instinct, imitation, and reverence. The grove where the triplets were born had become a sacred site, not just among rangers and researchers, but among the local communities. Elders brought children there to sit in the shade of the acacia, not to speak, but to feel. A small stone marker had been placed at the base of the central tree. It didn't name him. It didn't say Tao. It simply read, "He stood." One evening, during the last light of the dry season, a young filmmaker visited the reserve. She had heard the story years ago from her grandmother, who had worked as a cook at the old ranger station. She asked to be taken to the grove. The new ranger, no older than 25, nodded silently. He had never seen Tao, but he had studied him, watched the footage, memorized the notes, heard the way people said his name like a prayer. When they arrived, the woman stepped from the truck barefoot. She walked slowly to the marker and knelt. Then with the softest voice she said, "My father was never around. But this story, this elephant, taught me what being there means." As she stood, the wind picked up, carrying dust and seed and something else. The ranger felt it too, and for just a second, neither of them spoke. Because the grove didn't need words, it held presence, and presence was enough. Because sometimes legacy doesn't wear a crown. Sometimes it moves in quiet rhythms, in how a younger bull waits before stepping forward, how a calf pauses before drinking, how a ranger stands still before raising his voice. Tao had never led a herd. He had never been the biggest, or the fastest, or the loudest. But in the story that remained, he had become something far more enduring, a model, a myth grounded in memory, and a mirror for those who had forgotten how leadership could look. In a university lecture hall halfway across the world, his story was taught not in biology, but in ethics. A professor showed the footage of Tao kneeling beside the newborns, of digging the trench, of shielding Amali from the sun, then turned to his students and asked, "Would you recognize this as leadership if it wasn't from a human?" No one spoke for a moment. Then one student whispered, "It's the kind we need more of." In a school in northern Kenya, children reenacted the birth scene in a theater play. One boy played Tao. He didn't say a word. He just walked on stage when the music turned soft, stood beside the girl playing Amali, and spread his arms wide like wings to shield her. When the lights faded, no one clapped right away. They just sat, still, moved, and a grandmother in the second row wiped a tear from her cheek and said, "He reminded me of my husband." Back at the grove, nature did what it always does. It kept growing. The trench where Tao once dug filled in with time, then with rain, then with tiny green shoots that wrapped around the old roots. And each season, the calves returned, first with Amala, then with their own young. No one told them to. They just came. And somewhere in the quiet, beyond the trees, beyond the dust, beyond even memory itself, there was still the shape of a great elephant's presence, not seen, but felt. In the pause between footfalls, in the hush before dawn, in the way the world sometimes holds its breath and simply stands. 15 years later, the grove had changed. The tree that once shaded Amali during her weakest hours was now twisted and wide, its roots thick and tangled around the earth like veins. Grass grew where dry dirt had once cracked, and beneath it, the shallow dip Tao had dug was now a permanent hollow, lined with soft moss, filled with rain during the wet season. Locals called it Tao's Bowl. They said it never dried completely, not even in the worst droughts. Amelie had long passed. Her triplets, now full-grown, returned once a year, always together. They walked the grove in silence, touching trunks near the base of the tree, circling once, then leaving without a sound. One of them, the one with the curved tusk, had a calf of her own now. The little one had a strange habit for such a young elephant. Whenever it felt afraid, it would walk away from the group, stand alone for a moment, and look back, as if expecting someone to be there, as if listening for something without sound. The researchers changed. Generations passed, but the field notes remained. Kept in a locked wooden cabinet at the edge of the observation tower, now faded by sun, the notebook sat on top of all others. It was always the first book new students were asked to read. The first page had no data, only a sentence. He gave more than protection. He gave the right to be small in a world too large. And sometimes just before dawn, when the fog hugged the hills, A single figure could be seen from the tower, standing far in the distance, too large for a bush, too tall for a tree, never moving, never approaching, but always there, a presence in the mist, a reminder that the strongest ones are not always the ones who charge forward, but the ones who stay when no one asks them to. If this story touched you, like, share, and subscribe.